We're back with LA homicide detective J. Warner Wallace to talk about how forensic investigative skills can make us better communicators of faith in God. And Jim, this comes from your book, Forensic Faith.
Right.
You've really dived into all of these things. And I think people who love this whole idea of criminal cases and investigation are going to love your approach on this.
I hope so. I mean, I think there are some transferable skill sets, right? Especially when we're trying to communicate complicated ideas. And sometimes the most important thing we can do, I think, is decide who it is we're going to communicate those ideas to. So if someone asks me, well, how can I be a better communicator? We're tempted to kind of give them ideas about tactics and how to say certain things. But honestly, when people ask me, well, how do you win criminal cases? In that entire process in which you start, there's an opening statement, there's an evidence show where we'll do weeks and weeks of presenting evidence to the jury. Then there'll be a closing argument, and then they go into jury deliberation. But it turns out that the cases really are won and lost. It almost sounds kind of sad.
I hate that you say
I know,
this. You say
I know.
it even before the trial starts.
Yes,
it's jury
selection.
Oh,
It's jury selection.
But isn't it about truth? That's
It
just
is,
so
but
annoying.
the problem is that so many of us will have a presuppositional bias that might prevent us from ever even adopting any view other than our own. And we just need to know before we start, is the jury in that category? I think there are different layers of kinds of jurors. And in any trial, we have two groups that are in the room that we're selecting jurors from. People who are generally pro-prosecution and people who are generally pro-defense. And the defense attorneys don't want people who are leaning toward the prosecutor.
Yes.
And the prosecutor doesn't want people who are leaning toward the defense attorney. So figuring out where people fall in this spectrum helps us to seat a panel, hopefully, of people in the middle. Maybe inclined one direction or the other, but not so inclined that they won't even listen. So we're looking for the open middle. Well, the same thing is true for us who are communicating the Christian worldview. If you spend some time with people, you kind of know where they are on a spectrum, and I've kind of written about it in the book. But when I've got somebody I know is in the far spectrum who is so close-minded, I have to have a different strategy for that person. I call that a group 4, category 4 person. There are category 1s, though, that are so committed to Christianity. They're like, hey, I don't even need to know what evidence there is because I'm already in. But you know what? You probably have someone in your family who's in that middle area, who are younger probably in that group of the millennials or Gen Z, who are having open questions. They would call themselves Christians still, but they want to know it. I'm open to the possibility this isn't true. Well, that's when those group 1s who are committed, who don't even think the evidence is important, need to start to take a more evidential approach, because the first person that your kids are going to talk about and ask questions, it's not going to be Jim Wallace. It's not going to be any apologist who's writing a book. It's going to be mom and dad.
Yeah.
And if you haven't mastered the answers, if you haven't thought about the answers, well, then they're never going to pick up my book. You're never going to be able to go the next step, which is, well, read Forensic Faith. Well, that's not going to happen. We need to read these things.
Yeah.
We need to, as parents, be the best apologists that our kids know.
And I think about what you're saying, a lot of kids lose faith when they go to university. It's that intellectual time where they're receiving so much information, so much of it is kind of hostile to faith. And if there's no intellectual defense for that.
That's right.
Right, that's where they really need it. So I think as parents, you're absolutely right. And also you say in the book that people say, okay, you're talking about an invisible God, so you need overwhelming evidence to prove he exists. But you say in a criminal trial that there's rarely, if never, overwhelming evidence.
Yeah, you need like extraordinary evidence to prove an extraordinary claim. Well, every homicide is in some ways extraordinary, depending how unusual it is. Not many homicides, actually, you might think there's a large number, but relative to population size, homicides are incredibly rare. And the kind of homicide can make it even rarer. Yet when we go to trial, we don't say, well, now what kind of evidence? No, you're going to use the same mundane forms of evidence you would use to do a petty theft. It doesn't have to be extraordinary. It just has to be, is it beyond a reasonable doubt? And we do this all the time. Now, I think we need to be able to adopt that view of faith, not a blind faith that doesn't even know what the evidence is, and not an unreasonable faith that believes something in spite of evidence to the contrary, but a forensic faith that has to take a step of trust. I can't answer every question in the Christian worldview, but I've got enough evidence here to incline me in this direction, so that step of trust is very short relative to what I already know. And that's what Jesus would say, because he spent 40 days with the disciples after the resurrection, giving them many convincing proofs. Why? Well, isn't the resurrection enough? No, he knew the heart of humans, and he knew that we needed to have those doubts answered. And he stayed around for 40 extra days giving convincing proof, so that, yes, there'll still be a step of trust. This still seems crazy that I rose from the grave, but I've given you enough evidence to make your faith forensic.
And you know, we live in a culture, and I think especially here in Canada, where people really believe that faith should be private. Like there's a
Yes.
sense of like, we don't talk about it, it's our personal thing, you have yours, I have mine, and really mine can be a mixture of 7 different faiths, you know.
Yes, a smorgasbord. faith,
Yeah, so how do we start those conversations without being kind of the annoying person who's always trying to shove
Yeah.
your faith down someone's
Well,
throat?
I think what we do is we ask good questions. And most people in this, we talk about communication, the prosecutors do, is we ask good questions. And then we let the answers kind of speak for themselves. So learning how to ask good questions. And remember, this is not an argument we're having. I don't want to be argumentative, but we may formulate an argument for why. What I mean is a logical, step-by-step position we take that leads us to some truth claim. But it's really about a character issue, right? Am I willing to communicate? Do I know my juror well enough to know what makes that juror tick? And know what to say and what not to say. And so we talk about this a little bit in the book, but in the end, I really want the Christians I know to realize that if we continue to hold to our faith like a subjective opinion, then get ready to have those opinions run over. Because the culture is making claims about moral claims about all kinds of things that they will argue objectively. And then you as Christians want to adopt this view subjectively? If it's a matter of an objective truth claim made by the culture versus a subjective opinion held by Christians, then get ready for your subjective opinions to collide and get run over. We need to now make the case objectively for whether, I don't even like sometimes the fact that Christianity is true. There's days when it's hard to be a Christian, right?
Yeah.
But it's true objectively. It's not a matter of my personal opinion. And I have to be able to make that case for my kids so that they know, even on a day when they feel like chasing their passions, Christianity is still true.
And there's so much evidence, and you go over that in this book. You're going to want to pick up this book, Forensic Faith. Thank you so much
Thanks
for
for
coming.
having
There's
me. I
so much more.
appreciate
I
it.
feel like we just touched the
Oh, I'm
surface, but
glad
that
I had a
means that
chance.
people got to get the book, right?
That's right. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
We'll be right back.